She leaned closer, her voice low and almost playful. "Don't mention this to your brother." And in that moment, fixing her bike became the least complicated part of the afternoon. It was a warm afternoon, the kind that made the world feel a little slower, as if the air itself wanted you to stop and notice it. I had come by my friend's house for nothing important, just a quick visit, maybe a game on the console, maybe just to kill time. But as I walked up the drive, something else caught my attention before I even knocked on the door. She was there. His older sister. She was standing near the edge of the driveway with a bike that clearly wasn't cooperating. The back wheel spun unevenly, the chain rattling and then slipping loose with a metallic snap. She sighed, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and for a moment she looked more like someone caught in a private battle than the confident woman I'd always known her to be. I hesitated. Part of me thought I should look away, knock on the door, pretend I hadn't seen. But then she turned, noticing me, and her expression changed instantly, half frustration, half relief. "Oh, perfect timing," she said, her tone light but edged with a kind of sheepish amusement. "You're good with your hands, right? Maybe you can rescue me before I throw this thing into the street." I laughed awkwardly, stepping closer, trying not to seem too eager. The truth was, being near her always made me more aware of myself, of how I stood, how I spoke, how I looked. She was older than me, yes, but that only seemed to add to her presence. She carried herself with an ease that made me feel both younger and strangely protective at the same time. I crouched down beside the bike, looking over the mess of chain and gears. "It's just slipped," I said, though I wasn't completely sure yet. "I can probably fix it." She leaned on the handlebars, tilting her head at me. "Well, let's keep this between us, okay? Don't mention this to your brother. He'll never let me hear the end of it if he knows I couldn't handle a simple chain." There it was, the secret. Said casually, like a joke, but the way she smiled made it feel different. Like she was pulling me into her circle, even just for a small thing. It was as if a line had been drawn, me and her sharing something apart from the rest of the world. I nodded, grinning despite myself. "Your secret's safe with me." As I bent closer to the bike, I noticed the sunlight catching the edge of her hair, a soft glow that framed her face. The faint crease between her brows showed her annoyance with the stubborn machine, but even in frustration she carried herself with a kind of quiet grace. I couldn't help but wonder if she knew how striking she looked standing there, casual clothes dusted from the driveway, yet every movement precise, almost elegant. And that was when it hit me, this wasn't just about fixing a bike. This was about being noticed, trusted, maybe even needed by her in a way I hadn't expected. A broken chain had given me a chance I hadn't asked for, but now that it was here, I didn't want it to end too quickly. I crouched lower, tugging the chain carefully back toward the gears. My fingers were already smudged with grease, but I didn't care. The task itself wasn't complicated. What made it complicated was her. She stayed close, leaning over the handlebars as if she couldn't resist supervising, her presence a steady warmth at my back. "You've done this before, haven't you?" she asked, her voice playful but curious. I glanced up at her, then quickly looked back down, not trusting myself to hold her gaze for too long. "A few times. My old bike used to give me trouble all the time." She hummed thoughtfully, tilting her head, and I caught the faintest whiff of her perfume as the breeze shifted. It was subtle, floral, the kind of scent you don't forget once you notice it. I felt myself working slower than I needed to, almost deliberately stretching the moment. Then, without warning, she leaned down a little closer, pointing toward the sprocket with her fingertip. "I think it slipped right here, see?" Her hair slipped forward, brushing her cheek as she gestured. For a second, her shoulder grazed against mine, and though it was nothing, barely a touch, it sent a ripple through me. I forced myself to focus on the chain, nodding quickly. "Yeah, exactly. You've got a good eye for it." She chuckled softly. "Well, I like to think I can still notice a thing or two." Her words were casual, but there was something behind them, a flicker of pride that almost seemed like she wanted me to see her not just as my friend's older sister, but as a woman with her own sharpness, her own competence. The chain caught suddenly, snapping back into place with a metallic click. My hands slipped slightly, smearing more grease across my knuckles. I sighed in relief, pulling my fingers free. There we go. She clapped her hands lightly together in mock applause. Look at you, the hero of the driveway. I laughed, shaking my head, but as I reached for a rag lying nearby, she beat me to it. She held it out with a little grin, and when I took it, her fingers brushed mine. It was such a small thing, a blink and you'd miss it kind of touch, but I didn't miss it. Her skin was soft, warmer than I expected, and for half a second, neither of us pulled away too quickly. You're going to ruin your shirt if you wipe it there, she teased, nodding at the dark stains spreading across my forearm. I looked down and groaned. Guess I should have brought a mechanic's uniform. That made her laugh, really laugh. Not the polite kind you give to be nice, but the kind that rises up unexpectedly, genuine and bright. The sound of it filled the driveway, and something in my chest tightened. I wanted to hear it again, wanted to be the reason it happened again. She shook her head, still smiling, her eyes glinting with amusement. Well, if nothing else, at least I know who to call next time this bike decides to rebel. The words were light, but the way she said next time made it feel like an invitation, as if this small accident might not be the last excuse to bring us together. And I couldn't help but hope the bike was fixed, but neither of us moved away right away. I stayed crouched by the wheel, wiping the last bit of grease from my fingers, while she stood close, arms folded loosely, watching me with that quiet satisfaction people get when they've been rescued from something frustrating. You make that look easy, she said, tilting her head, her voice edged with amusement. I grinned, shrugging as I straightened up. Easy is relative. You should see what my hands look like. She laughed, and before I could reach for another rag, she pulled a tissue from her pocket and held it out. Her timing was slightly off. When I reached to take it, her hand brushed mine. Just a faint contact, the soft press of her fingertips against my knuckles. It was nothing dramatic, but the effect startled me. For a split second, it was as if the rest of the world blurred, the only sharp detail being that tiny spark of touch between us. She seemed to notice too, because she pulled her hand back a little too quickly, smiling as if to cover it. Here. You'll thank me later. I took the tissue, clearing my throat. Thanks. You're saving me from explaining these hands to anyone I shake hands with today. That made her laugh again, but softer this time. It was a laugh shared only with me, low enough that I felt like I'd been let in on something private. The kind of laugh that wasn't for anyone else's ears. As I wiped at my fingers, I caught her watching me. Not in an obvious way, but with a quiet attentiveness, as though she were memorizing the moment. When our eyes met, she didn't look away right away. Her smile lingered, then faded into something gentler. Seriously, she said at last, her voice quieter now, don't mention this to your brother. He still thinks I can do everything myself. I nodded slowly, pocketing the crumpled tissue. I won't say a word. There was humor in the way she said it, but beneath the humor, I caught something else, a flicker of vulnerability she probably didn't show to many people. The idea that she had to hold everything together, to always be the capable one, and how letting me help her, even with something as small as a bike, wasn't just about convenience. It was about allowing herself a moment of weakness and trusting me enough to see it. The air felt heavier after that, though not in a bad way. The cicadas droned in the distance, the late afternoon light slanting across the driveway in golden streaks. I stood there, greasy rag in hand, realizing the atmosphere between us had shifted. I wanted to say something more, something that would acknowledge the current running quietly beneath our words. But instead, I just smiled back at her, letting the silence do its work. And in that silence, the smallest things suddenly felt enormous. The way her arms loosened from their folded position, the way her shoulders relaxed, the way her eyes softened just slightly as if she'd let me into a part of herself that most people never saw. That was the first moment I understood. Fixing her bike wasn't really the story here. The story was the space that opened between us, private and unspoken, carrying its own kind of humor, its own kind of weight. By the time the bike was propped safely against the fence, the sun had begun its slow descent, painting the sky with that hazy mix of amber and rose that always makes the evening feel softer, calmer. She stepped back, brushing her palms together as if dusting away the frustration of the task, then gave me a smile that seemed both grateful and thoughtful. "You've earned a break," she said, nodding toward the porch. "Come on, sit for a bit. I owe you at least some water." I followed her up the steps, my pulse steady, but louder in my own ears than I wanted to admit. The porch creaked under our weight as we settled side by side on the wide wooden steps. She handed me a glass of water, condensation dripping cool against my fingers, and then sat with her knees angled lightly to one side, her dress brushing against the wood. We didn't speak right away. The cicadas were doing most of the talking, filling the quiet in a way that wasn't uncomfortable. It gave me a chance to notice her in a way I hadn't before, not just her presence, but the small details. The faint laugh lines near her eyes, the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the subtle sigh she let out once she was seated, as though simply sitting down was an admission she rarely allowed herself. Finally, she glanced at me, her voice a little lower, more thoughtful. "You know, people always think I've got it all figured out, that I don't need anyone to help me with anything." I turned the glass slowly in my hand, watching the light catch on the water inside. "And do you?" I asked gently. Her lips curved into a small wry smile. "Most of the time. But not always. Not today, apparently." There was humor in her words, but beneath it, I could feel something more fragile, something she was testing by sharing it with me. I wanted to honor that, to tread carefully. "I don't think needing help is a weakness," I said after a pause. "Sometimes it just means you've been carrying more than anyone realizes." She was quiet for a moment, then turned her face slightly toward me. Her eyes held mine longer than I expected, long enough for me to feel the air shift between us. "You're a good listener," she said softly. "That's rare." The compliment landed deeper than I let on. I could feel the nearness of her shoulder brushing the space between us, the warmth of her presence as we sat there, separated by only a few inches, but bound by something unspoken. I took a sip of water, partly to steady myself, partly to buy time. "Maybe people just don't give you enough space to be heard," I said. Her expression softened. She didn't answer right away, but the way she exhaled, the slow release of breath, the way her shoulders relaxed, told me my words had reached her. The porch, the fading light, the hum of the evening, it all folded into that moment, a quiet intimacy that felt far more significant than the broken bike ever had. The evening had grown heavier, the kind of summer dusk where the air feels thicker, wrapped in the orange glow of a fading sun. We lingered on the porch steps longer than we probably should have, neither of us in a hurry to break the silence. It wasn't awkward, it was the kind of quiet that felt like a choice, like both of us knew words might only dilute what was already being said in the spaces between us. Eventually, she set her glass down beside her and stood, smoothing her hands over her clothes as though brushing away the dust of the day. "Well," she said with a half smile, "I suppose I should let you go before I find another way to keep you busy." Her tone was light, playful even, but there was something behind her eyes, something that told me she wasn't as ready to end the moment as she pretended. I rose to my feet too, setting my glass down next to hers. For a second, we just stood there, facing each other in the golden spill of light from the sky. The cicadas sang their endless chorus, and in the distance a dog barked, grounding the world while the air between us grew fragile, uncertain. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer now. "You really did save me today." I opened my mouth to brush it off, to tell her it was nothing, but before I could, she stepped closer. Her hand reached out, fingers brushing my forearm. It was meant to be casual, a simple gesture of thanks, but the way her touch lingered betrayed more than her words ever could. Her skin was warm against mine, the faintest pressure, but enough to make my breath catch. The contact was gentle, almost hesitant, yet deliberate, like she knew the risk of letting it last too long, and yet didn't want to let go. I froze, not in discomfort, but in awareness. Every nerve seemed to notice that single point of contact. The world shrank to that small, delicate bridge between us. She looked up at me then, her eyes steady, searching. The moment was suspended, stretched thin and taut, as though time itself was curious to see what would happen if neither of us moved. And then, just as quickly as it came, she drew her hand back. The warmth of her touch faded, leaving a ghostly echo on my skin. She smiled, a little firmer this time, masking whatever she might have been about to say. "You've been a good friend to me," she murmured, almost as if reminding herself where the boundary lay. But the way her gaze lingered a beat longer told me that what she felt, and what I felt, wasn't something either of us could easily tuck away. I managed a small smile, though my chest was tight. "Anytime," I said quietly. As she turned slightly toward the door, the last rays of sunlight caught her silhouette, wrapping her in a glow that made her look almost untouchable. And yet, I knew I'd just touched her, just felt her, however briefly. It wasn't a kiss, it wasn't a confession, but it was something. And sometimes the smallest touches carry the heaviest weight. That night, long after I had left her porch and walked back under the dim streetlights, I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling of my room. The day should have been simple: fix a bike, share a drink of water, go home. But her words kept replaying in my head, wrapping tighter around me each time I heard them in memory. "Don't mention this to your brother." At first, she had said it like a joke. A playful little line meant to keep things light. But now, in the quiet of my room, the phrase carried a heavier weight. It was no longer just about a bike chain or a bit of grease. It had become something else, a line drawn between what could be spoken and what couldn't. I rolled onto my side, pressing my palms against my forehead. I could still feel her hand on my arm, the warmth of it lingering like an imprint I couldn't wash away. My skin seemed to remember her touch more vividly than my mind wanted to admit. It wasn't just the touch. It was the way she looked at me in that moment, the pause in her eyes, the hesitation as if she had let something slip out, something she hadn't planned to show. I asked myself 100 questions. Was I imagining it? Was I mistaking kindness for something else? Or was there really something unspoken there, humming beneath the ordinary? The ceiling didn't answer, of course. Neither did the faint hum of traffic outside my window, or the restless creak of the house settling into the night. I was left with only the echo of her laughter, the sound of her voice, and the strange realization that I wanted her laughter to belong to me again. But that's where the secret made everything sharper. Because if there was anything there, if what I felt wasn't just in my head, it wasn't something I could confess easily. Not to her. And definitely not to my friend, her brother. The thought twisted inside me. My loyalty tugged one way, my desire another. And in the middle of it all stood her, confident, graceful, older, untouchable in every sense, and yet, for a fleeting moment, she had reached out to me. I pressed my hand to my arm where she had touched me, half embarrassed by the way I was holding onto something so small. But when you're in the quiet of night, the smallest things feel enormous. Her touch wasn't just skin on skin. It was the unspoken permission of a secret. I knew then that I couldn't tell anyone about it. Not because she had asked me not to, but because some things, once spoken aloud, lose their shape. They collapse under the weight of explanation. And whatever this was, fragile as it might be, I didn't want to break it by trying to define it too soon. So I lay there, eyes heavy but mind restless, caught between the comfort of what had already happened and the ache of wondering what might come next. A few days passed before I saw her again. Life had moved on in its usual rhythm: work, messages from friends, the ordinary noise of living. Yet beneath all of it, she remained a steady presence in my thoughts, as if a piece of her had followed me home that evening and refused to leave. When I finally did see her, it was by chance. I was cutting through the side street near her house, and there she was, leaning against the fence with her bike propped neatly beside her. This time, the chain sat perfectly in place, the wheels straight, no sign of the battle that had brought us together just days before. She looked up as I approached, and the smile that spread across her face wasn't the casual, polite one she often wore. It was warmer, softer, as though she had been expecting me, even if she hadn't. "Well," she said, her voice carrying a familiar playfulness, "good news. The bike hasn't staged a rebellion since you worked your magic." I smiled back, slowing my steps. "Glad to hear it's behaving. Maybe it just needed some attention." Her eyes lingered on mine at that, the corner of her mouth tugging upward in a way that suggested she heard more in my words than I had spoken. She didn't answer right away, and the silence between us felt thick again, filled with that same charged quiet we'd shared on the porch. I stopped a few feet away, unsure if I should move closer. But then she closed the distance herself, stepping lightly until she stood beside me. Her hand brushed against mine as if by accident, but the way her fingers lingered just slightly told me it wasn't. The touch was fleeting, no more than a whisper, but it said everything. It carried the memory of her hand on my arm, the warmth of sitting shoulder to shoulder on the porch, the secret of her quiet sigh when she admitted she didn't always have to be strong. I glanced at her, and for a long, unhurried moment, we held each other's gaze. No jokes, no words to fill the space, just the quiet acknowledgement that something had shifted between us. It didn't need to be spoken aloud. Words might have ruined it, turned it into something too heavy, too complicated. Instead, what existed between us lived best in the quiet, like a note of music still hanging in the air long after the instrument has gone still. Finally, she gave me a small smile, soft and knowing. "Thanks again," she murmured. The words were simple, but her tone carried layers, as if thank you was just a placeholder for all the things she wasn't saying. I nodded, my chest tightening in the best way. "Anytime." We stood there a moment longer, the world moving on around us, the distant bark of a dog, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the hum of life continuing as usual. But within that pause, the two of us shared something private, something we didn't need to name. And as I walked away, I knew the secret we shared wasn't really about a bike at all. It was about the bond forged quietly between us, unspoken but undeniable, a connection neither of us would mention to anyone, least of all her brother. 27.